We've got a jam-packed episode of No Filter today. We have Jennifer Abel from the Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively drama filing a motion for summary judgment. There is a lot that hit the docket, but I'm going to summarize it for you. We're going to recap it. We have a Dancing with the Stars update, and then I have a very special guest on later in this episode with a lot more tea to spill. So I hope you're ready for it. Let's dive in. This is No Filter with Zack Peter, your go-to source for all the latest pop culture and reality TV tea, served fresh all week long. Now, let's dive in. Well, guys, we did it. We did it. We were successful in campaign #SaveAndy's Well, actually, sorry. Spoiler alert. Dancing with the Stars. We have made it to, I think this week was the semifinals. And so now we have made it, I believe, to the finals. Or do we have one more week? How many weeks of Dancing with the Stars are left? Let's see. 3 weeks left in this current season. What's left? I thought this was the semifinals. So next week is what, the finals? Then we have the final finals. This was birthday night, the celebration, the anniversary of Dancing with the Stars. Okay, so the final date is November 25th. So yeah, we have next week, and then the 25th is the finale. Wow. So we have 2 weeks. This was the third week. We have 2 weeks left to go. So we have the 18th and the 25th. So we have Jordan. We have Elaine still left. We have Dylan. We have Whitney Levitt. We have Alex Earl. And then we have Robert Irwin, Crocodile Son. People get mad. People are getting mad at me on TikTok. And they're like, why do you call him Crocodile Son? Why do you call him Crocodile Son? Have some respect. And I was like, I have the utmost respect for the Crocodile family. Okay? First of all. And second of all, mind your business. So yeah, we finally did it. Andy has survived week after week after week, even though I think he should have been gone with Corey Feldman at the beginning of the competition. I'm not normally a Dancing with the Stars person, but I have fully embraced this Dancing with the Stars era and this season, and I can say we have some solid dancers. I think next on the chopping block, the next 3 to go are going to be Elaine, Jordan, and Dylan. As much as people love Dylan, as great of a dancer as Jordan is, I just don't think Jordan has the popularity, and I don't think Dylan has the dance moves to take it all the way. Elaine has improved, but I also don't know if the popularity is necessarily there. So I predict they will be the next 3 to go. Maybe Elaine, Jordan, Dylan, or Elaine, Dylan, Jordan. But either way, the final 3, I'm putting money on it right now. Whitney Levitt, Robert Irwin, Alex Earl. That, which is crazy, because if we go weeks prior to Dancing with the Stars, I need to pull up that episode of when the cast was announced and see if we can actually prove that I called it. I absolutely said that this is what was going to happen. These were going to be our final 3. So I'm very proud to say that I'm very good at these predictions. So hopefully I'm right. We're going to pull a clip of that so we can show receipts, proof, timeline, screenshots, everything. Okay, so congrats to... Listen, Andy gave a good run. Congrats to him for making it week after week. He now has a bunch of loyal fannies for Andy that I'm sure are going to carry him into the next era, the next decade, the next chapter of his Andy legacy. But his time has come. He has been given, he was not given a final rose, and he was sent packing, and it was absolutely time, because I was about to riot. Okay, let's take a quick break to shout out this week's sponsors, and then let's get into the Jen Abel motion for summary judgment and what it means. It's so satisfying to get great deals on the things your home actually needs, especially before the holidays. I'm telling you, Wayfair is the place to shop for all things home. Everything from sofas to spatulas, you name it, they have it. And it's on sale during Wayfair's Black Friday sale. Starting October 30th, you can shop Wayfair's can't miss Black Friday deals all month long. Wayfair has styles you can't find anywhere else. No generic pieces that you've seen 100 times, okay? So you can make your home feel more like you. And right now, you can get up to 70% off during Wayfair's Black Friday sale. Plus, you can sit back and relax. With Wayfair's fast and easy shipping, everything home comes right home just in time for the holidays. All right. I've already started looking. I mean, I think I'm doing more shopping for myself on Wayfair more than I've bought any gifts for anybody else. But with this Black Friday savings, like my living room is going to be stocked. It may be time to even upgrade the studio, right? Don't miss out on early Black Friday deals. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop Wayfair's Black Friday deals for up to 70% off. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, wayfair.com. Sale ends December 7th. If you're dealing with hair issues like thinning or shedding, but you feel totally stuck on what to try next, I get it. There are so many products out there that it's hard to know which ones are actually going to do anything. And that's exactly why I gave Nutrafol a closer look, right? It's not just the hype. It's physician formulated, clinically tested, and even recommended by dermatologists. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1.5 million people. You can feel great about what you're putting into your body since Nutrafol hair growth supplements are backed by peer-reviewed studies and NSF content certified. That's the gold standard in third-party certification for supplements. I feel like my hair is stronger, shinier. I feel like even my hairline is starting to strengthen. So if you want to see thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months, try Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code NOFILTER. Find out why Nutrafol is the best-selling hair growth supplement brand at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code NOFILTER. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code NOFILTER. Booyah, baby. Booyah. Okay, so that said about Andy, we have Jen Abel's motion for summary judgment. There was a lot that hit the docket this week, but I think this is the meat of it, right? If you want someone that's going to be going through document after document, line after line, I suggest going to somebody like Lauren Knighty of the Court of Random Opinion. Lots of other great content creators that are going in these really, really deep dives. I'm just going to kind of summarize it and essentially just give you the meat of it. If you guys want to get back to where we go through a lot of the legal documents, maybe that's something we can consider doing again. I just kind of feel like it's so cumbersome and it's like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And there are other people that I feel like are doing a really good job of that. And I want to support them and, funnel the traffic that way. That said, so to summarize, so it seems like I saw Not Actually Golden and Elsie call this the reverse Uno card that Jennifer Abel has thrown down against Stephanie Jones. And so because Jennifer Abel was working for Stephanie Jones, it appears that she's trying to use this as a strategy, a rather smart strategy, to get Stephanie Jones to turn on Blake Lively, which I always have predicted from the beginning. One thing I'm good at is predictions. In order to save themselves, they're going to have to throw somebody under the bus, right? I predicted that the New York Times would have to throw Blake Lively under the bus. Luckily, they were able to get out unscathed, and they were okay. They kind of still deflected to her and her litigation privilege, but that's, all in the past now. But when it comes to Jennifer Abel, she's asking for the judge to rule on this, on her case with Jones Work PR and Stephanie Jones. So because Jennifer Abel was working for Jones Work PR at the time that Blake Lively is accusing her of this alleged smear campaign, which they have yet to prove, and I think the text messages we got this week also kind of are counterintuitive to that argument. I think if anything, the text messages showed that this was an organic campaign and that the Wayfair parties did not launch a strategic campaign to tank Blake Lively's reputation, specifically in retaliation to her SH claims. I think, if anything, the information that has now come out doesn't help Blake's case as much as it actually is hurting Blake's case. Anyway, that said, so because Jennifer Abel worked for Jones Work PR at the time of this alleged smear campaign taking place, she is then arguing that Jones Work is responsible for the damages, right? Indemnification. Now Stephanie Jones has argued that Jennifer Abel went rogue on this case. That was one of the arguments that she made earlier on. So it'll be interesting to see if and how the judge allows this to work in, because Stephanie Jones was like, yes, technically she was working for me, but she went rogue and I fired her and I had to take her phone and I had to do all this. Well, Jennifer Abel's like, well, actually, no, I was still employed by Jones Work at the time. I was technically acting on behalf of the company, because if you're saying that this client was entitled to your company, then I was working for you. So essentially, if you're working on behalf of your employer, then therefore they're responsible for your actions under their employment, right? So if Jennifer Abel wins this means that Stephanie Jones's company would then have to pay out any of the damages to Blake Lively if Blake Lively wins in her case against Jennifer Abel. So it kind of passes the buck back off onto Jones Work, and in a way gets Stephanie Jones to now start rooting for Blake Lively to lose, for her case to be unprosperous. Otherwise, Stephanie Jones is going to be the one that has to pay Blake Lively, right? They're going to have to pay for, the fire that she's seemingly started by providing these text messages to Blake Lively, because that's what is believed, right? That she improperly took these text messages that belonged to Jennifer Abel and she shared them with Blake Lively, which would be a violation of privacy. I would imagine there could potentially be some sort of criminal ramifications for that. I doubt that we'll actually see any criminal charges against Stephanie Jones, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. None of this looks good for Stephanie Jones, and now it seems that she has to really go against Blake Lively if she wants to save herself at this point. It kind of seems like she's the one that started this. She got the dominoes falling, she got the snowball rolling, and now she kind of has to sit in the mess that she created. And I don't know how this is going to play. I think it's a smart strategy. I don't think it's a play that anybody saw coming with Jennifer Abel, because we've also seen Jennifer Abel now be the one to be able to bring forward the Van Zandt drama. Since Baldoni's defamation case was thrown out, Jennifer Abel's case with Jones Work and Stephanie Jones, through that we were able to sneak in Van Zandt, and hopefully we'll be able to use the Van Zandt case to provide a solid foundation for this shady smear campaign that kind of looks like it came from Stephanie Jones and Blake Lively. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. But that's just to summarize the recap of everything that went down on the docket in the past 24 hours. This is a pre-record because I do have an interview, a special guest that's going to be on in just a minute. But I will be at BravoCon this weekend, so I'm letting you know now. Friday's episode will be a pre-record. Thursday's episode will be live. We have Link Lauren that's going to be joining the show on Thursday, November 13th. We also have Sean and David that'll be back as well. So yeah, lots to get into. But on that note, let's do another quick shout out to this week's sponsors. Fall already feels like a reset. Between back to school, busier routines, shorter days, finding time to cook can be tough. I get it. I feel it, right? That's why I love Factor. Their chef-prepped, dietitian-approved meals make it easy to stay on track and enjoy something comforting and delicious no matter how hectic the season gets. My fridge is fully stocked with Factor meals. They're delicious and they're convenient. I just pop it in the microwave and it's ready in minutes. They have lots of variety, different meals. Choose from wider selections of weekly meal options, including premium seafood choices like salmon and shrimp at no extra cost. You can support your wellness goals, even enjoy more GLP-1 friendly meals and a new Mediterranean diet option, which is packed with protein and good for you healthy fats. Eat smart at factormeals.com/nofilter50off and use code nofilter50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping for 1 year. That's code nofilter50off at factormeals.com for 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for a whole year. Get delicious, ready-to-eat meals delivered with Factor. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. Listen, your friend who's experiencing full body betrayal in the bathroom does not want a beard oil kit, okay? Give them daily dignity and endless luxury they'll actually use with a Tushy bidet, okay? I just got my very first Tushy bidet. I have to say, first of all, it was super easy to set up, and it doesn't ruin my bathroom aesthetic, and I feel fresh, right? Inside and out. I just feel like when I come out of the bathroom, I feel like a brand new person. Tushy is the everyday luxury bidet that instantly transform your bathroom habits and bottom health for life. It's the perfect gift to indulge every personality on your list, okay? Tushy bidet is a daily techie luxury that's refreshingly practical and easy to use. 99% of people who wash with Tushy Wave feel cleaner and fresher after going to the bathroom. Tushy Wave instantly modernizes your daily routine and bathroom with a super sleek seat plus 2 separate front and rear nozzles for the most complete clean, okay? You're gonna feel fresh. Remember, a-hole is only a naughty word if you wipe. For a limited time, our listeners get 10% off their first bidet order when you use code NOFILTER at checkout. That's 10% off your first bidet order at hellotushy.com and use the promo code NOFILTER. That's hellotushy.com, promo code NOFILTER. All right, we've got a big interview today, and I hope that you take it with a grain of salt. I hope you take it with an open heart and an open mind. Everything that you will see presented in today's episode is available for you to research yourself and available for you to look into yourself. Del Bigtree is somebody that I've been familiar and have worked alongside many, many years at this point, and I know his heart, I know his mission, I know what he stands for, I know what he believes in, and that's in creating a better, healthier future for you and your family, and that is why I wanted to have him on the show today. He has a new documentary that is out now. It's called An Inconvenient Study, and it dives into this bigger conversation, right? This is not a political episode, and nothing about this is politically related. I'm sure people can turn it into a political statement, but it's not. It's a conversation. It's a dialogue that we need to continue to have for the safety of your children, my children, and future generations to come. And I really, really hope you listen and just take it all in, breathe through it, digest it, take some time, listen to it again if you need to. And I encourage you to check out his new documentary. It's called An Inconvenient Study. And listen, one thing that you're going to hear a lot, especially when it comes to documentaries like this, is that it's not, is that it's dangerous to listen to propaganda, right? That we're often, this fear-mongering of this conversation of propaganda is so big and prevalent in our culture. And I think one thing I hope you listen to, one, you remember that you are a smart and intelligent and free thinker with great critical thinking skills. So there's no information that you can be presented with that you should treat as gospel, especially when it comes to science, because science is something that is always evolving. Math is something that we know of as fact. 2 + 2 will always equal 4. But when it comes to science, the whole premise of it, it's theory and hypothesis, right? So the whole premise of it is to question it and to expand upon it and to learn more and to test it, right? Like we're meant to break it and put it back together and find alternative theories and alternative presentations. And that's what I want you to remember. And also remember your own critical thinking skills, your own intelligence. I am not the authority. Del Bigtree, who's today's guest, is not the authority. There is no authority because, like I said, science and this information is always evolving and growing. And so I hope you remember that. So when it comes down to this, don't listen to anti-vaccine propaganda. I think you're smart enough to decipher what is truth, what is propaganda, and what's information that you can use to just make an educated decision of your own, right? An informed opinion, all of your own. I believe in your intelligence. I believe in your ability to take information. I mean, listen, I do it all the time. I look at, even when it comes to, politics, I like to look at the right, I like to look at the left, and then I like to compare the two and try to come to my own conclusion and determine what makes the most sense for me. We have to get back to critical thinking. So don't take today's episode as, the absolute truth by any means. Take it as information that you can explore further and hopefully expand your own level of consciousness, expand your own, level of intelligence, and continue to push these conversations forward. But hopefully you listen to something that you're probably not going to hear on the mainstream media. And if there's anything we've learned, especially in covering this Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni legal drama that's unfolded, is that we can't often trust the mainstream media at this point. So again, I am not the authority. The show is always for entertainment purposes, but most importantly, the show is also to just provide you with information that may be kind of thought-provoking, right? This is No Filter with Zack Peter, and we're going to continue to push the conversations and open up the dialogue. It's what I've always done for the last 10 years on this show, and I want to continue to do that. I believe in you. I believe in your intelligence, and I just want to give you access to information that you're probably not going to easily gain anywhere else. And hopefully through it, you can come to your own conclusions. You can make up your own mind, and you can, go on your own journey of self-discovery. But I do encourage you to check out An Inconvenient Study. And please welcome to the show today. He is the host of The High Wire. He is the CEO of Informed Consent Action Network and the executive producer of the new documentary, An Inconvenient Study. Please welcome Mr. Del Bigtree. The documentary just launched a couple weeks ago. I see you've been doing screenings in different cities. I was bummed that I missed the LA screening, but what has the reception been so far?
Zach, it's really been incredible. We won the Malibu Film Festival just about a month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. We got Best of Fest, which was super exciting. But we've made that night, we made the film free for everyone in the world. I don't care about festivals. I don't care about, selling tickets in theaters. This is a movie that I think everyone in the world needs to see, especially anyone that has children, anyone that plans on having children. And we've just had an amazing response, tens of millions of views worldwide. I'm watching scientific debates about this study, which is a very important study that compared vaccinated children to completely unvaccinated children. We'll get into the details of that, but it has really jump-started the scientific debate, which is what I wanted this film to do. So I'm seeing it being discussed in Australia in a Senate hearing there. They brought it up to their health department, and a famous scientist by the name of Dr. Peter Gutcha, who started the Cochrane collaboration, which is the highest esteemed scientific body looking at proper studies. He's weighed in and said, this study is really incredible. We need to do more studies like it. So it's been super exciting to see that, people are being moved by it. Lots of people are reaching out in social media and texting me and emails saying, I've been questioning vaccines. This film really made sense to me. Or I have relatives that never understood this issue. I sent them the film, and now suddenly they're on board. So it's things like that make you feel like, you're over the target in some way.
Now, first question that I think would come to mind when it comes to, you being the one, when it comes to you being the one to put on this documentary, is that you come from a TV background. You were a TV and film producer. What makes you, being that you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist, what makes you the expert to put out a film like this where we can actually trust the legitimacy of, the information being presented?
Yeah, sure. Great question. You're right. I'm a journalist. I don't have a medical background. I did win an Emmy Award, though, making television about science and medicine. I was on the Doctor's television show. I was there for 6 years. And so as a journalist, like any writer of New York Times, Washington Post, you learn to do investigations, to read studies, to ask people, where's your evidence in the statement that you're making? And so I'm not making any medical claims. I just keep, looking for the science and showing the world what I've seen. I think as a journalist, I've done a deeper dive into the conversation and the question about, are vaccines safe, than any journalist in history. And I mean by that is I've really been focused on that one topic ever since 2016, when I left the Doctor's television show to make a documentary about a doctor inside of the CDC, a whistleblower named Dr. William Thompson, that came forward and said, we're committing scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies, and specifically the MMR autism debate and the studies around that at the CDC. That film was called Vax. That catapulted me into the center of this discussion. I traveled the country, with that film, and then started interviewing thousands of parents that were telling their own stories of vaccine injury. And I was shocked to find that it wasn't just stories about autism or just the MMR vaccine. What I discovered was that there was just this ocean of injury. These parents telling stories like, my child died right after a flu shot, or my teenage star athlete teenage daughter, has been paralyzed ever since she got the Gardasil vaccine. Or, we never got to the MMR vaccine. It's the center of your study. Our child regressed into autism right after the DTaP vaccine. Now, all of those are anecdotal stories, but when you start hearing them over and over and over again, it really starts to make you question the science and think, I got to do a deeper investigation. So in 2016, the end of 2016, I started my own nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network, and I hired international scientists to help me do this investigation and research. I essentially said, I want to read every study that's ever been done on vaccines, especially when it comes to safety. I was less concerned about efficacy, whether or not the vaccine stops measles or if the vaccine stops polio. I want to know, did it have other side effects, and how did they say that the benefits outweighed the risks? And so that's the work I've done since 2016. I started a show, The High Wire, to show people what we're finding. And a lot of people don't know, Zach, that this is the only product in America that you can't sue the manufacturer if it hurts your child. I mean, if a car seat ends up not working, you can sue that manufacturer and win millions of dollars. If the baby food poisons your child, you can sue. If you give them Tylenol and they have liver failure, you can sue, but not with vaccines. And I think that that's creating an imbalance in the pressure upon these products to make the best product possible. Why would they fix any issues if they can never be sued for the issues that they have? So that's a big part of the investigation. In order to get around that, because you can't get into a courtroom, you can't sue the manufacturers, I brought in an attorney named Aaron Sirius, a constitutional attorney, and we started suing the government because it was our government that has taken on that liability to protect the manufacturers so they know the answers to many of these questions. And we started suing the FDA and winning. We've won against the FDA, the NIH, Health and Human Services, all to prove that they haven't been transparent about what they know about the dangers of vaccines. And so that, I am just a journalist, but I'm a very tenacious journalist. And ultimately, I never say anything that I can't back up with actual evidence. In the end, this comes down to, this isn't opinions, right? Right now, for instance, one of the big debates that this film is causing is this conversation that Robert Kennedy Jr. has also brought up as HHS Secretary. And that is that we have never done a double-blind, placebo-based trial on any of the childhood vaccines prior to licensure. Now, I keep seeing medical experts saying that's not true. We have done those placebo-based trials. And then I've said, fine, then send them to me, because I've won lawsuits against the government. They weren't able to provide them, but somehow experts on CNN, MSNBC, and New York Times keep saying that's not true. We've done those studies. This isn't a debate. They need to hand them to us. In fact, at this point, I think this debate's getting so serious, I would like New York Times to publish on the front page of their newspaper every placebo-based trial of the supposed childhood vaccine program that they've done. I'm telling you, they don't exist, and they cannot provide evidence. And so at a certain point, what do? That's where we're at. Right. The scientific side doesn't have answers to the questions that we're now asking.
And so, because that's kind of the end of the debate, right, is that we hear that the science is settled, vaccines are safe. What you're saying is that there's never been this placebo trial done on any of the current childhood vaccines. And what this documentary then explores is this study that you then pursued with the help of Aaron Siri to actually work with Henry Ford to look into what could potentially be contributing to the rise in chronic illness. And just right now, we're at 54% rate of chronic illness here in the United States. 1 in 31 now have autism, which is wild comparing to the 1 in 10,000 back in the 80s. So we clearly have some sort of rise in not just autism, but chronic disease, autoimmune conditions. Can you explain to people what the placebo trials would prove necessarily and why you think we haven't had those done yet? Because that, I mean, it kind of, like you said, CNN, and even just in regular debates with friends, you know, at the PTA meetings, everybody says the science is settled, the studies are there, vaccines are safe and effective.
Yeah, well, first of all, the least scientific statement you can make is to say that the science is settled. The science is never settled. We're always learning more and more. We're always evolving. The environment we live in is changing. Things that may not have been toxic at one point, maybe they're toxic because there's another chemical that has entered our bodies from a different product. Maybe something we're eating. Maybe there's a synergistic effect that didn't take place when we were getting vaccines 50 years ago, but now, and when you look at the world our babies are being born into, the studies show that a mother's umbilical cord has upwards of 260 different toxic chemicals in it upon birth, which means our babies are being born in a toxic soup. They're being fed toxins. It's not mother's fault. Many moms are trying to detox before they get pregnant, which I think is a really good idea, but still, when we think vaccines are safe based on studies or ideas with the polio vaccine from 50 years ago or 100 years ago, smallpox, certainly the world we live in has changed. Is it possible that the toxins that are in a vaccine would have been fine when we didn't have pesticides and herbicides all over our food, when we didn't have heavy metals like aluminum that we're breathing in because we now live in the aluminum age? Or is it possible that the radiation from cell phones and all of these things that are all combining right now to make a difference in the health of our children? See, this is what Robert Kennedy Jr., this is why I think he won and he finds himself as HHS secretary, because we need to ask new questions, which is we now recognize we have the sickest children we have ever had in America. This is the first generation of kids that are believed they will not live as long as their parents, meaning as parents. Right now, you are expected to live longer than your own kids. How can that possibly be, and how is that acceptable? And if we want to look into why that is the case, we cannot allow industry standards to get in our way of doing proper investigations. We can't hold off like it's some religious belief that we can never ask questions about vaccines because they're unassailable. They're perfect products. There's no such thing. And by the way, we've made a lot of changes to the vaccine program. Back in the 1980s that you mentioned, when we had about a 12% chronic disease rate in our kids. So they either 12% of American kids either had a neurological disorder or an autoimmune disease. We were getting 10 vaccines then. Now we're getting upwards of 54 vaccines. And remember, many of these vaccines have 3 different elements, like DTaP is a diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis vaccine. So it has 3 different diseases in it. So ultimately, we're giving our children 72 vaccines and growing by the time they're 18. So we're giving so many more vaccines. And when you look into the science, they never did a study. They never did a study. Is it better to get 10 or better to get 54? They've never done a study. There's a baby that they just won a lawsuit against saying SIDS. And a lawsuit, I mean, I said you can't sue the manufacturer. They sued the government. They sued the government just last week and won, proving that their baby was killed by the vaccines. The brain of their baby swelled. He was only, I think it was a he, I believe so, 11 months old. He got 10 vaccines all at one time, and 5 hours later turned blue and died. And so we've got to be able to ask the question, maybe 1 vaccine was safe, maybe 2 was safe, but is giving 10 all at one time? Are there any studies where we look to see, can we give those all at once? No study exists. They've never done that study, Zach. And it's these types of things that when people say the science is settled, really settled on what? Was it settled on 1 vaccine, but now we give 10? Was it settled on 10 vaccines during your entire 18-year-old life, but now we give 72? Is it still settled based on old science? See, this is where we've got to be realistic, and we've got to recognize we live in modern times, and we can do better diagnostics and investigations now if we're allowed to. So Robert Kennedy Jr. is under major attack by the pharmaceutical industry, of course. They want you to believe that these 72 vaccines they're giving you are safe. But let's remember this. Not only are we getting more vaccines in this country than every other country in the world, our kids are on more drugs than any other country in the world. So what we have to ask ourselves, does that mean we have better doctors? Does that mean we live better when we have more drugs in us, when we have more vaccines? Because when you look at all the other modern nations in the world, their kids are simply healthier. So maybe all these drugs aren't making our kids healthier. Maybe the fact that we take twice as many vaccines as Denmark, and Denmark is they're considered to be up to date. They are not having polio outbreaks and smallpox outbreaks and all the fear that's out there. How are they giving half the vaccines we are? Why did we need double the amount of vaccines? See, this is why I don't believe the science is settled. If it was settled, Denmark and Japan and Switzerland and Australia and America and Canada, we'd all have the same vaccine program, but we don't. We're the most vaccinated and we are the sickest.
And now there have been some studies done, but the concern that's presented in the documentary is the long-term safety. Like what was it, a 5-day range that they were studied for to see if there's any sort of adverse reaction when, I think in the documentary you present the argument if something happens on the 6th day, God forbid, your child has a serious adverse reaction on day 6 or day 7. I mean, that's less than a week after getting it. There are no long-term safety tests that are done with these vaccines.
Right. So let's just get to the basics of what a long-term test should do. If you're going to put a brand new pharmaceutical product onto the market, then you want to know if it has side effects we don't see. We know that, for instance, in a vaccine, is it creating antibodies? Yeah, look, we can see the antibodies in your bloodstream. Great. All right, so we have a sense that it might be effective, but is it doing something else to your body that you don't know about? And in the film, I point out a very important study that was done by a pro-vaccine scientist that runs many of our vaccine programs for the third world. And back in 2017, he decided to look at a DTP, that's the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis program that he had put out 30 years earlier in Guinea-Bissau, Africa. He realized, after 30 years, I only got to half the country. Half the kids got the vaccine, the other half didn't. So I can actually compare the vaccinated ones to the unvaccinated ones and see how their lives turned out after 30 years. And to his shock, he discovered that the children that got the DTP vaccine were dying at 5 times the rate of the kids that never got it. But here's what's interesting. They didn't die of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. The vaccine was effective at blocking those diseases, but what he discovered is it was weakening their immune systems to all sorts of other things like encephalitis, swelling of the brain, mosquito-borne illnesses, and river, toxins. So it looked like it protected, and that's the only thing they ever looked for. They looked, is it protecting against the diseases? Yes, it is. But the overall health outcomes were worse, 5 times the rate of death. And so what we're asking for is that type of study to be done. We're getting more than one vaccine. We're getting, remember, 16 vaccines and 72 doses. Yeah. So is there a vaccine in there that is maybe lowering our life expectancy? It's blocking the disease it's trying to block, but overall it's weakening our immune systems. I think that those are the studies that every mother should want to have done. And so when you think about when a vaccine enters, into the market, did it get tested long enough with one group that got it and one group that got like a saline injection, the placebo group, and we tracked them for 5 years. In 5 years, you would know if there was more autism in the vaccine group. Right. In 5 years, think about autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases don't happen overnight. They usually, your immune system's slowly getting dysregulated. And so things like asthma, things like diabetes oftentimes, or multiple sclerosis, all of these things take years to develop. So if a product is causing those problems, you need the study to be long enough to capture that issue. And when you look at vaccines, unfortunately, it is the shortest testing, the smallest test groups we've ever seen in any pharmaceutical product. As you point out, I use the example of a hepatitis B vaccine that's given on day 1 of life. That is on the first day of life. We're talking the most fragile moment our babies are alive. You would hope that vaccine vaccine was like really incredibly well tested. But when you look at it says it right on the package insert, this product was tested in 147 kids, and they were watched for 5 days after each injection. And there was no placebo group. What kind of study is that? I mean, as I said, if a kid died on day 6, the study didn't capture it. They say, well, no babies died in our trial. Yeah, your trial is only 5 days. You know, Grandpa's Viagra got like a 10-year safety study, okay? Why are our babies not taken that much concern for? I'll even say like cancer drugs. We will deny a cancer patient that's dying of cancer, they're 4-stage cancer. They want to try a drug that they're hearing is having a lot of success in a trial, and it's called right to try, right? There's a big conversation we're having right now. Should they have the right to try that drug since they're dying anyway? Well, up until recently, the FDA will say, look, safety is so important. We need to follow this placebo group for 5 years, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait for this drug to be available. So we'll let cancer patients die waiting for a safety trial, but a perfectly healthy child that's being born to a perfectly healthy mother that got a blood test so we know she's not hepatitis B positive. We know there's no hepatitis B around, which is a sexually transmitted disease that you only get if you're sharing heroin needles or sleeping promiscuously with a lot of different partners. That's who the vaccine was made for. I know our baby's not going to be going through that, and you only cared to do a 5-day trial with no placebo group on 147 kids and said it was safe to put a sexually transmitted disease into my baby on their first day of life? Hello? Welcome to the world. Here's your first breath, and here comes your first sexually transmitted disease. This is the problem with the vaccine program. This is the problem with the science around it. It is not robust. It is anything but. It is the shortest time periods, no placebo groups, as I've said, and so it looks like they're rushing this product onto the market every time, and then they say, we don't need to ask any questions. Really? I have a lot of questions, and that is why we've been doing the work that we've been doing.
And that's why it's so crazy to me that you can't even sue the manufacturer itself. You have to go up against the US government in order to prove your case, which people have done time and time again through the vaccine court. And they've been able to prove that there are links to these adverse reactions and specific vaccines. And, you know, it's still such an unregulated system. Now, let's get into the Henry Ford study that's presented in the actual documentary, because this is the first time that you kind of spearheaded somebody to really dig into this and provide you a copy with this study. Explain to us what that study is.
So back in 2016, when I was traveling the country with my first film, Vaxxed, someone introduced me. I was up in Detroit, and they said, I know the head of the infectious disease department at Henry Ford Health. He's the lead virologist there. Would you like to meet him for dinner? Henry Ford is one of the biggest research institutes in the world. I mean, they do the best science there is on all sorts of drugs and products and things like that. So I was really excited to meet him for dinner. And so when we went to dinner, he said to me, as soon as we sat down, he said, you know, I watched your film, Vax. It's very compelling. He says, but you've been saying something as you're traveling the country that I found offensive. You keep saying in these YouTube videos that they've never done the proper science to prove that vaccines are safe. And he said, so I took issue with that. I sit on the biggest databases in the world. And so I went to investigate so I could bring you the science. And then he looked at me and he said, and I am shocked that I have to sit across from you and tell you you're right. We've never done safety studies, the placebo studies I'm talking about of any of the childhood vaccines. He says, now, let me be clear, that doesn't mean the vaccines aren't safe. It just means we can't say that they're safe. I would also posture it just means you cannot say that the science is settled because he didn't do any. But I'm adding that on to this conversation. So in the end, he said, I don't know what I can do for you. I'm still pro-vaccine. I said, no, that's great. I said, you know what? I'd like to challenge you then. Since there's never been proper safety science to begin with, the only thing we could do now to test the hypothesis that vaccines are safe is we need to do a comparative study. Would you ever do a comparative study that compares the health outcomes of vaccinated children with children that never received any vaccines? And he said, sure, I would do that study. And Zach, I knew that some other smaller groups that have been said to be biased, some will be called, but they've done this study, like 600 homeschool kids, or a
Yeah.
pediatrician that was, doing light vaccinations on some of his. He compared his kids, but no major institution ever done it. And I said, look, this could be harmful to your career if I'm right. He said, don't worry about that. I'll follow the data wherever it leads me. So he ended up getting that study done by 2020. It took 4 years from the time we had that conversation, and then he refused to publish it. And I wanted to know why. And I kept calling him and saying, look, publish whatever it is you found. He's like, Del, it would be problematic for me. I was like, what do you mean? So I ended up asking him out to dinner in 2022. I flew out to Detroit, and I had a sneaking suspicion that this study did not turn out the way he wanted it to, but I wanted to hear him say it. And so I decided to bring some hidden cameras with me and some recording equipment, just so that I always had proof of what was said at that dinner. And that's really what's at the heart of our film, an inconvenient study, which you can see it at inconvenientstudy.com. But in the end, that study, which is still unpublished, it shows the conclusion that he came, a guy that keeps telling he's pro-vaccine, the conclusion was the vaccine, and by the way, it was a big study. It was about 18,500 children. Nearly 2,000 of them are unvaccinated. So it was a good proportionate group to do a comparative study with. And what they found was that the vaccinated children were 2.5 times more likely to develop a chronic disease than those that were unvaccinated. And there were some other really scary things, like 6 times more likely to have a neurodevelopmental disorder if they were vaccinated compared to those that weren't vaccinated. And then, of course, autoimmune disease, nearly 6 times the rate of autoimmune disease if you were vaccinated compared to those that didn't get vaccines. Those are really, really huge numbers. I mean, 20% or 50% increased risk is bad. We're talking 500% increased risk in this study.
And so his reasoning for not publishing the study was more of his fear of the reaction to his career rather than the potential opportunity to be questioned, right? Because then if that study comes out, then the whole point is to have other peer-reviewed studies continue to ask these questions and to prove whether or not the science really is settled.
Exactly right. I mean, to be clear, this is just one study, and it's a retrospective study because, like we said, we didn't do the placebo studies, and they will say now it's unethical to do a proper safety study. So a study where the people have already made the decisions. We're not going to force them to take the vaccine. We're also not going to force them to be in a placebo group where they didn't get the vaccine. You're stuck with comparing families that already made their decisions. So in this case, families had 2,000 kids that didn't get any vaccines compared to the 16,000 that did. And so you look at that. It's not a perfect study, but it is called the gold standard under this situation because there's no other study we can do. Now, if this study was all by itself, okay, you could say we should do more studies. Certainly, we're seeing a signal. But this study is made even more importantly because it's about the 5th one, as I've said, that's been done like this, where they compared vaccinated to unvaccinated. And what's shocking, Zach, is not a study in the world has ever compared these two groups and showed that the vaccinated are actually healthier. Every single time it's the vaccinated that are far sicker. And so once science starts being reproducible is what we call it, where you see the same results no matter who does it. You can do it on a certain group of kids. You can have an anti-vaccine group supposedly do the study, and then you can go to Henry Ford and they say they're pro-vaccine and they do the study and they come up with the same results. That's really incredible. But you're right. I ask him, why aren't you publishing the study? I have him on camera, and he says, it's a good study, Del. It's an important study, he ends up saying. And I ask him, is there any way to do this study better than you've done it? I mean, he's one of the best in the world. He said, I don't know how you could do this study any better. And then when I say, then why aren't you publishing it? He says, because I would lose my job, I would lose my career, I would be finished. And that, that is why we really find ourselves in the trouble that we're in. The pressure now by the medical institutions and the pharmaceutical industry is so great that even a world-renowned scientist like Dr. Marcus Zervos at Henry Ford cannot just publish the study as he thinks it should be published. Instead, and that's what's happening. Henry Ford has come out and said this isn't a good study. The data is flawed. The study design was flawed, and that's why it didn't get published. So I leave people to make up their own mind when they watch this film. But I will say this, that this is their head of infectious disease. This same scientist ran the Moderna trials on the COVID vaccine for Henry Ford Health. I've never seen them complain about his methodology before, and I've never seen them have any issue with the work that he does. And he's telling me I did this study as best as it could be done. So yeah, I don't believe them, but that's my opinion. And they have sent me a cease and desist letter. They said that it's defamatory for me to say that this study, was good enough to be published. That's really not for me to determine. I am just a journalist. But my opinion is that if this study had shown that the vaccinated children were the healthier ones, and it was the unvaccinated children that were 2.5 times more likely to have chronic disease. The unvaccinated had 6 times the levels of autoimmune disease and 6 times the rate of neurodevelopmental disorders. I have a sneaking suspicion that Henry Ford would have published that in a second, and it would have been a headline around the world. But it's not turning out like they want. And so all I'm saying is this. You can't just poke holes in this study. At this point, we are seeing this happen in so many studies. It is now time for the biggest institutions in the world, the CDC, NHS in England, and every major health system around the world, and Kaiser Permanente. I'm asking, as every parent should, will you please take all of your kids and compare the vaccinated to your unvaccinated kids and ask the same question Henry Ford did? Who has more autoimmune disease? Who has more neurodevelopmental disorders? Who has more autism? Who has more asthma? Who has more lupus and multiple sclerosis and ADD, ADHD? We got to get to the bottom of this because our kids are not doing well in America. 75% of our kids would not pass this health exam to join our military. That is really, really a sad state of affairs in a nation that's supposed to pride itself on its greatness.
Now, and you can actually go to an inconvenientstudy.com, read the study for yourself, and watch the documentary. Dowd, the pushback has been, insane. Just looking at the headlines as of this week, Politico says the anti-vaccine movement isn't satisfied with winning over the GOP. NBC News, anti-vaccine group with ties to RFK Jr., saw another windfall last year, records show. Lucrative lies. The Washington Post, God is an anti-vaxxer inside the conference celebrating RFK Jr.'s rise. The New York Times, RFK aligns with allies embrace anti-vax label they once rejected. So it seems like they're trying to tie RFK, who seems to be pushing for more of this transparency within these institutions, such as the CDC, but the pushback from the mainstream media seems to be overwhelming. And you even see one of the references is Dr. Peter McCullough, who was essentially ostracized for challenging, the mainstream narrative. And that seems to be the fear that other doctors and scientists, they don't want to be ostracized. They don't want to be ripped apart by the New York Times and Politico and CNN and all of these news agencies that will crucify you if you dare to question a narrative, but yet still can't provide any specific studies that prove the actual safety for children.
All I can say is that there's several issues. Mainstream news, especially our television set, between 50 and 70% of all advertising is funded by the industry of pharma, right? And you can test this yourself. I don't want people, and by the way, I don't want anyone to just take my word for it. I always tell you ways you can test this yourself. When you're watching television, especially the news, watch your commercial breaks and count how many of the commercials are for a pharmaceutical product, and then recognize that all of us in television, I used to work at CBS, I worked on the daytime talk show, The Doctors, I essentially work for whoever's advertising is on my show. And if 60 to 70% of my advertising is coming from pharma, if I do a story against vaccines or a drug or a problem or an issue, they call my boss and I am told, don't ever do a story like that again. That's how powerful they are. So when you see these news agencies giving headlines, of course they are. They are essentially propaganda machines for the pharmaceutical industry. But also, let's remember, all of the people writing those headlines are the same ones that told us that COVID vaccine was 95% effective and that we wouldn't catch the coronavirus if we took the vaccine. And it was the best way to protect our neighbors. Well, everyone knows now, especially those that are getting their 10th booster, that this vaccine didn't stop infection. In fact, most people are getting sick 4, 5, and 6 times with COVID after receiving the vaccine. We all know that whether you got the vaccine or not, you spread it with everybody, yet none of the people that write those headlines I've never seen them apologize for their headlines about COVID, saying the anti-vaxxers are lying to you. They said I was lying when I said the vaccine's not going to stop transmission. And by the way, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not psychic. On my show, The High Wire, which is every Thursday, I read the emergency use authorization language by the FDA one day before any citizen in America received the vaccine. And it said very clearly, these trials did not establish if the vaccine could stop transmission. So I said to my audience, I don't know what they're talking about when they say 95% effective, because the FDA is already acknowledged they have no idea if it's going to stop transmission. Then you look at Tony Fauci, that admitted in our Congress a few months ago that social distancing, that 6-foot distancing rule, which is also why we got locked in our homes, that they just made that up. They just made that up. There was no scientific basis for it whatsoever. It's also been stated in Congress that the masks that we were told to wear, that and especially the bandanas, but a regular surgical mask, that the particle of a coronavirus is so small it goes right through it, that there was no science that showed that masking worked, yet we were arresting a surfer all by himself in San Francisco or Los Angeles Bay for, being out there surfing without a mask on. That level of insanity was delivered by all the people that just wrote the headlines that you just read. And so I'll say this. I like my track record. I like the track record I had all the way through COVID. I like Robert Kennedy Jr.'s track record on all of these issues. They will keep saying he's spreading misinformation, but the only misinformation I can see is by our main medical authorities all the way through COVID. And right now, we've moved beyond COVID, and we're asking very important questions about the childhood vaccine program.
Well, the interesting
Where
thing
are the placebo trials and things like that? And they can't. They're not providing them.
The interesting thing, though, is their argument, their pushback specifically with COVID is it's like, well, we didn't know any better. It was an unprecedented time. We were just going with the information we had right in front of us, which is so interesting that we still get that pushback for childhood vaccines, where at this point we should know better. This has been decades of, a buildup of this schedule, a decade of questions, a decade of cases that have been brought before the vaccine court in the U.S. government with families that have won their cases, and yet we're still, it's like it doesn't matter if it's too early or at this point almost too late. Like, we just don't want to have these questions about whether or not we can challenge, any vaccine.
By the way, 5 billion with a B, billion, has been paid out to those parents that have won these cases against our government on vaccines. So is that settled science? Is a $5 billion, windfall on vaccine injury? Where's that settled science? And by the way, they're so full of it on COVID, because then what they're saying, Zack, is Bigtree is the most proven psychic the world has ever seen. If I can show, I do it on my show all the time. I show what I was saying when they were saying 95% effective. I told my audience this vaccine is not going to stop transmission. How did I know? But Walensky, head of CDC, doesn't know? Because she was lying to you. As I said, the FDA already wrote it. They already said they knew it wasn't capable of stopping transmission. And then when there was actually a great moment where one of the head CEOs of Pfizer was asked in a hearing in the parliament in Europe, the European Parliament, they were asked, did you test to see if the vaccine would stop transmission during the trials of the vaccines? And she said, no, we were moving at the speed of science. We didn't have time to test for that.
Yeah.
Well, wait, hold on. Wasn't that the entire point of a vaccine? If the vaccine is not going to stop transmission, then what does it actually do? And so, look, we could do this all day. I could point out that they did know the truth. And right now, Jay Bhattacharya, who's the head of our NIH, he was a part of a group that wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. This was a declaration in the middle of COVID signed by tens of thousands of world-renowned scientists and doctors. And what it stated was, do not lock us down. This science will not work. You cannot hide from a virus. We need, and what they called for was protection of our elderly. It was really only the elderly that were at a high risk for COVID.
Right.
Let's protect them while the rest of us live naturally and develop what we call herd immunity, develop immunity so that we protect them. They didn't require vaccines. Well, you know what? As soon as they made that statement, Francis Collins, head of NIH, and Tony Fauci are in an email. This is what I do. I sue. We've got these emails where we proved he reached out and said, this group of scientists we need to shut this narrative down now. They didn't ask, hey, bring them to my office. Let's have a scientific debate. Is it possible that lockdowns will do more damage than the disease itself? No. They went out of their way to censor those scientists, to censor Dr. Robert Malone, who invented the mRNA technology. Literally, the inventor of the technology came out and said, I invented this. I took it myself. It's made me sick. I now recognize the reasons this vaccine is deadly and dangerous for you. Please don't take it. No one from our government called him in. They didn't bring him in to meet with NIH. He invented the thing. Instead, they censored him. They censored his LinkedIn channel. They censored him on YouTube. We were watching science being censored at a moment where on TV they were admitting to us, we really don't understand this virus. We don't understand what we're doing. Then why are you censoring the scientists that appear that they do know? And so this is the problem. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is such a breath of fresh air. He's bringing back the questions. He's bringing back real science. And look what he's done. He's taken the chemical dyes out of our children's food. Finally, we've known it's been there for decades. He's taken the lead and the arsenic out of our baby food and our baby formulas. Why did no other HHS secretary do that? This week, he just opened up hormone therapy for women, saying that this was really a hoax, saying it was dangerous. There's so many great things under the supervision of a doctor that can make your life better. He pointed out that Tylenol is not good to be taking while you're pregnant. None of this has anything to do with vaccines. This has to do with things that the science knows. You are watching what should have happened from the very beginning from our regulatory agencies, and finally it's happening. And of course, he's under attack by the pharmaceutical companies, pit bull, which is media. They don't want you to stop taking drugs. And by the way, they're not done at 72 vaccines. They dream of 100 vaccines by the end of next year and hundreds more. They want us to take thousands of vaccines for all the viruses and bacteria in the world that never killed us up until now. And that's what I want to point out. We aren't, there's 8 billion people on this earth. That's 8 billion people that were all born to grandparents that caught the measles. So when people tell me it's deadly, I say measles was the most infectious disease there is. The whole world caught it, and we are here because it didn't kill our ancestors or our grandparents, and was a Brady Bunch episode back in the 1960s that had a laugh track as everyone in the Brady Bunch, look it up, it's there. They're laughing at each kid as they get the measles. So then why is our news telling us it's deadly now? Why is New York Times saying Dell is going to spread deadly measles virus when just a couple of decades ago, we laughed when children got the measles? Something's wrong with the way media is handling this. And that's what I'm trying to correct. I don't want to make any decisions for anyone. What I want you to be is informed. And you should know that there's not a study in the world that can show you that the vaccinated children are healthier than the unvaccinated. I think that's a problem. And for that reason, I'm not vaccinating my kids. But you may not think that's a problem, and I will fight for your right to vaccinate your kids the same way I'll fight for your right to not have to vaccinate. It's our choice. It's our bodies. These are our children, and we should be allowed to do what we think is right for our own kids. If we can't, if I don't control what goes into my children, then they're not my children. I live in a state-owned, adoption center where the government controls my child. I don't think that that's right. I don't think that represents what our founding fathers believed in this country. And I definitely will say this. If they can force vaccinate you the way they did during COVID, then you are not a free citizen. You have the same exact rights as a farm animal. And
Yeah.
I frankly think we're smarter than that.
I agree. I mean, next time they try to pull this, I hope we have more of those No Kings protests. I hope we have a bigger conversation about fascism. I hope that we really get the same reaction. I hope we're marching for No Kings the way we did not back in 2020 when all of this was happening.
Now,
listen, and there's so much that we can get into because you were there when we had the bombshell Jenny McCarthy episode on the doctors. But one question I want to close out on is basically the argument that's often made by the pro-vaccine. And it's crazy that this is even a conversation of pro-vaccine versus anti-vaccine, because I feel like there's a lot of nuance and gray matter in the middle here. But the argument, I guess, against the anti-vaccine movement is that the benefit outweighs the risk when it comes to vaccines. What's your reaction to that?
You need science to know what the risk is. And I'll say it this way. I once ran into a head of the CDC up in, I think it was Washington. And I had a debate with her. She'd come to see me speak. And I said, look, I'm glad you're here. Most people like you don't come to see me speak. And she said, you're making people, believe that we're not telling the truth. And I said, no, I'm not doing anything like that. I said, I'm just stating what are facts. And I said to her, let me make the reason I have a problem. I said, you're saying in all the newspapers up here, there's a mumps outbreak. This was back in 2016. There's a mumps outbreak. I said, I know the numbers. I've looked at the numbers. I actually know how to read the studies. And the mumps outbreaks are happening among mostly all vaccinated communities, right? And she said, well, yeah, that's true. I said, but every headline is saying that the mumps is here because the anti-vaxxers aren't vaccinating their kids, which is not at all true. Am I wrong? She's like, no, you're right. I said, then why aren't you calling those papers and saying that's not true? This is not an issue of unvaccinated. Actually, it's a vaccine failure problem. And then I asked her, I said, look, and so I said, okay, I want to further this conversation. Remember, she's like the head of CDC for Washington State. And I said, why do you think, I said to her, do you accept that vaccines do injure and maim and kill some children? And she said, of course I do. There's no product made by the pharmaceutical industry that every child can take. I know that there's rare events where those children are killed. They're killed every year, but it's rare. I said, how do you go to sleep at night knowing that a program that you're enforcing kills innocent children, that may one day, that a child that could have been a president of the United States, a child that maybe was a scientist that could have figured out how to make a vaccine that doesn't kill children, but we'll never know because they're dead. How do you sleep at night? And she said, because it's an accepted casualty to achieve herd immunity. I said, okay, great. I understand. Then what is that casualty expected to be this year? How many kids are the vaccines going to kill this year to get that herd immunity? And she said, well, I don't know. I said, what do you mean I don't know? She says, well, we don't have the numbers on that. I said, didn't you just say it's an accepted casualty? You're a scientist, so you're telling me you are accepting a casualty, but you don't know how big it is? She said, well, I guess. I said, because look, you seem like a nice person. And I would guess that there's a threshold for you. If it's 1 in a million kids is dying, maybe you can accept that. But what if it's 1 in 10,000? What if it's, 1 in 5,000? Or what if it's 1 in 500? Is there going to be a moment where you're going to say, I don't accept that casualty anymore? She says, well, of course. I said, then I think it's dangerous that you know that they're not doing those studies and we have no idea how many kids are being maimed and injured and killed by this vaccine program. I don't think that's good science, and I don't think you can make the statement that it's that the remedy that it's what was it the term you said, that the risk is is greater than the benefit's greater than the risk.
Right.
I'll say this: the measles only killed 400 children and people all across America. It killed 400 people every year. In about 1961 was the last time we got that stat before there was a vaccine. Okay, that sounds like a lot. 400 kids. No one wants to see them die. But there's been studies that have shown that if a person catches measles as a child, they reduce their risk for heart disease and heart attacks by 10%. I believe last year, heart disease and heart attacks killed somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million people. So if having the measles would have saved 10% of those people, you just saved 75,000 to 100,000 people by letting them catch the measles. So we could have saved 100,000 lives, but instead we'll let 100,000 die from having an immune system that was made stronger by measles to protect the 400 that might have died. See, this is the science that no one wants to talk about, and we could do this all day too. Yeah. So in the end, we need to ask new questions, and we cannot treat the science around vaccines as though it's a religion. Religion demands faith. Religion doesn't have to answer questions, and it can call you a heretic if you question the major orthodoxy of it. Science is the exact opposite. Good science should always invite the question and love the opportunity to once again dig through the math and prove itself, showing you the math. When they say we don't have to show you the math, this is settled. Trust us, have faith. Socially distance yourself, lock yourself in a house, trust us, the science is there. Take the vaccine, trust us, have faith, the vaccine's going to stop transmission. It's not a religion, and we've got to stop treating it like that. And that's what Robert Kennedy Jr. is doing. That's what I'm doing. And so many great new doctors and scientists that are now looking into this. Dr. Peter McCullough doesn't want to have to be against vaccines. He believed them in his whole life. He's the most published heart doctor in the world. Why is he now on our side? Dr. Paul Merrick, the most published ICU doctor in the world. Why is he now saying the vaccine studies haven't been done properly? Dr. Pierre Corey, I could go on and on. Dr. Robert Malone. All of these world-renowned scientists are now agreeing with Robert Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree. Why? Because it's great to be attacked by the Washington Post and the New York Times? No. Because it happens to be what the science tells you when you finally look at it. And all we can do is keep providing the science. And in the end, the parents are going to have to ask themselves, actually, who do I trust? And who has lied to me? And who has told me the truth? And I think in the end, more and more people are waking up. And now it looks like 50% of America is questioning the vaccines. I think 60% of pregnant women recently polled are saying they are not going to follow the exact CDC schedule, which means we live in a different time now. The majority of people are questioning vaccines. And let's not just leave regular people. 90% of doctors in America are not taking their COVID booster, even though it's recommended by the CDC. So even doctors don't trust the system any longer. Yeah. So don't blame me.
Yeah.
We're all starting to question what's going on here, and we should.
I mean, it's the same. It was like Jenny. They beat her up for, the last almost 2 decades now for just posing the questions by sharing her own experience. And the thing that's so frustrating for someone like me is you see these, oftentimes it's moms, but, of course, dads have, a say in the conversation as well. But it's not that there are people that are trying to misinform them. It's not that these are unintelligent people or unintelligent mothers. It's that they're losing faith in the system, very similar to the mainstream media and how they don't understand why people don't want to believe them anymore, or how many times they've been proven to have deceived the American people, and to, instead of taking accountability for why they've lost that trust, they want to deflect the conversation onto somebody else that's misinforming you without actually figuring out that they've become the problem by not being honest with the American people, and that's why they're losing faith. There's a reason, like moms that are lining up to question the schedule, they want to trust their doctors. They want to trust that the system is going to work for them and that they can trust that this schedule is going to protect their children rather than it is going to harm them. And if you've lost faith in them, then it's your responsibility to gain their trust back rather than to shame them for not listening to you, because clearly that's backfiring now.
And by the way, they're shaming all the parents of vaccine injured children that were pro-vaxxers, that believed in the vaccine program until it destroyed their child's life. They had kids that were running around saying, I love you, mommy. I love you, daddy. They went and got their vaccine, and that was the last time they ever heard their child speak to them. I've interviewed thousands of people with that story. It's not fair to say those parents are crazy. They watched it with their own eyes. They didn't want to be anti-vaccine. In fact, they call themselves now ex-vaccine. They believed in it and it failed them. The same way the COVID vaccine has failed so many millions of people. This is a new conversation now. I'm glad you're having it. We're all having it. We're in this together. You know, I'm not trying to eradicate bad vaccines. I don't want to take them out of the world. What I'm saying is you should have a choice, and we have to have a really honest conversation about this because our kids aren't healthy. And we should be able to ask why, and we should be able to challenge every single product that is in their lives right now. They deserve better. And so that's all that we're trying to do, is have a really honest conversation right now with no sides being taken. Let's put it all on the table. The plastics, the forever chemicals, the pesticides on our crops, the hormones in our beef, the fluoride in our water, the vaccines, the aluminum, the pollution in our air, all of it. It's time to say we're smarter than this. We know how to do better. We know how to do science. Let's do that and figure out what's going on here.
Yep. They can watch you on the High Wire if people want to learn more, or you can go to an inconvenientstudy.com. You can watch the film completely free. I watched it this morning, and you can also download the actual study that's available if you want to check out the Henry Ford study. It's all available at an inconvenient study. Dale, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some inconvenient truths today.
Thank you very much, Zach. You take care.
Appreciate you.